There is a moment that arrives unbidden, a moment you cannot prepare for because no one has told you it exists, and even if they had, the words would have slid off your consciousness like water off stone. It is the moment when the veil does not lift, because that metaphor is too gentle, too romantic, but rather when the veil reveals itself to have been there all along, and in that revelation, you understand with terrible clarity that you have been looking through something your entire life, seeing a filtered version of what is, and calling that filtered version reality. This is the dangerous moment. This is the moment when you become aware of the pattern. And I want to be very clear about something from the beginning. This is not a comfortable realization. This is not the kind of awakening that the New Age marketplace sells you with soft music and incense and promises of inner peace. This is something else entirely. This is the kind of seeing that, once it has happened, cannot unhappen. You cannot return to the innocent perception of before. You cannot unknow what you now know. And what you know is simply this: that reality is not what it appears to be. That beneath the surface of ordinary experience, there runs a current of meaning, of intention, of pattern that has been operating all along, shaping your life, shaping human history, shaping the very texture of what we call existence. The pattern. What is the pattern? This is where language begins to fail us, and yet language is the only tool we have, so we must use it carefully, knowing its limitations, knowing that we are trying to point towards something that exists beyond the realm of the sayable. The pattern is the underlying structure of reality, not the physical structure that physics describes, not the mathematical relationships between particles and forces, but something more fundamental still. It is the organizational principle that determines why certain things happen when they happen, why certain people meet when they meet, why certain ideas emerge when they emerge. It is the hidden logic of the world, and for most of human history, most human beings have lived their entire lives without ever catching a glimpse of it. This is by design. And when I say by design, I am not necessarily invoking conspiracy, though conspiracy certainly plays its role. I am pointing towards something more subtle, the way that culture itself functions as a filter, as a set of blinders that keeps our attention focused on the narrow band of experience that culture deems real, relevant, worthy of notice. Culture is not your friend. I have said this many times, and what I mean by that is not that culture is your enemy in some simple oppositional sense, but rather that culture is an operating system that was not designed with your liberation in mind. It was designed with its own perpetuation in mind. And one of the most effective ways to perpetuate any system is to make that system invisible, to make it seem like the natural order of things, like the way reality simply is, rather than one particular construction of reality among many possible constructions. So the pattern remains hidden, not because it is inherently difficult to perceive, though it is that, but because we have been trained from birth to look elsewhere, to focus on the dance of surfaces, the play of appearances, the endless drama of social life with all its competitions and anxieties and desires. We have been hypnotized, in a sense, put into a kind of trance by the constant bombardment of cultural messages, each one reinforcing the others, each one contributing to the construction of what we might call consensus reality. And consensus reality is precisely that, a consensus, an agreement, a collective hallucination that we have all agreed to participate in, usually without ever realizing that we agreed to anything. But then something happens. This is the mystery at the heart of the whole matter. Something happens that punctures the membrane, that creates a crack in the cosmic egg, that allows a sliver of light from outside the system to enter. And in that light, suddenly, terribly, beautifully, you see the pattern. You see that the random events of your life are not random at all. You see that the so-called coincidences that have punctuated your existence were not coincidences, but connections, nodes in a web of meaning that extends far beyond what you had previously imagined possible. You see that time itself is not the simple linear flow that the clock describes, but something far stranger, something more like a fractal, with patterns repeating at every scale, with themes and variations echoing across years and decades and centuries and millennia. What triggers this seeing? The triggers are various, and I think this is important to understand. For some people, it is a psychedelic experience. The encounter with psilocybin or DMT or ayahuasca or mescaline, substances that have been used by human beings for thousands of years precisely for this purpose, to dissolve the boundaries of ordinary consciousness and reveal what lies beneath or beyond. The psychedelic experience, properly approached, is not a recreational diversion, but a technology of the sacred, a means of making contact with dimensions of reality that are normally invisible to us. When you sit with the mushroom, when you enter that space, you are not hallucinating, or rather, you are dehallucinating, stripping away the cultural hallucination that you have been living inside your entire life and perceiving, perhaps for the first time, something closer to what is actually going on. But psychedelics are not the only door. There are other catalysts, dreams that seem too meaningful to be mere dreams, synchronicities that pile up until they can no longer be dismissed as coincidence, moments of crisis or breakdown when the ego's defenses crack and something else floods in. Some people arrive at the pattern through meditation, through years of disciplined attention, turning back on itself until it finally perceives its own constructed nature. Some arrive through art, through the creation or contemplation of works that seem to come from somewhere beyond the individual artist's mind. Some arrive through love, through the kind of connection with another being that reveals the arbitrary boundaries of the self to be exactly that, arbitrary, constructed, dissolvable. And some people, and this is perhaps the most mysterious category, arrive at the pattern simply by thinking, by following a chain of ideas with sufficient rigor and honesty until the chain leads them to conclusions that cannot be reconciled with the ordinary view of reality. This was the path of many mystics and philosophers throughout history. They did not take substances. They did not practice elaborate techniques. They simply thought their way through the puzzle until the puzzle dissolved and something else revealed itself. However you get there, though, wherever the door appears in your particular life, the experience itself has certain consistent features. One of the most striking is the sense of recognition, the feeling that you are not learning something new, but remembering something old, something ancient, something that you knew before you were born, but forgot in the process of becoming a human being in a particular time and place and culture. This is why the Greek word anamnesis, which means unforgetting, is so apt as a description of mystical experience. You are not adding to your knowledge. You are subtracting from your ignorance. You are removing the layers of conditioning that have obscured what was there all along. And what was there all along? The pattern. The pattern was there before you noticed it. The pattern was there before you were born. The pattern has been there, in some sense, forever. Or rather, the pattern exists outside of time altogether, in a dimension where concepts like before and after do not apply in the way they apply to ordinary experience. When you perceive the pattern, you are not perceiving something that is happening now, in this moment. You are perceiving the structure of all moments, the template according to which all moments unfold. You are seeing the eternal as it manifests in time, and this is a perspective shift of such magnitude that it literally changes everything. This is where the danger begins, because once you have seen the pattern, once you have had that recognition, you cannot simply return to your previous life and pretend it did not happen. Oh, you can try. Many people try. They have the experience, whether through psychedelics or meditation or crisis or any other door, and then they attempt to stuff it back into the box of ordinary reality, to explain it away as a hallucination or a temporary aberration or a trick of brain chemistry. And sometimes they succeed, at least outwardly. They go back to their jobs and their relationships and their routines. They stop talking about what they saw. They train themselves to focus once again on the dance of surfaces. But something has changed in them, something they cannot quite name, a kind of splinter in the mind that will not let them rest entirely easy in the world of consensus reality ever again. I think this half-suppressed recognition is actually more common than we realize. I think there are millions of people walking around right now with some version of this splinter in their minds, people who have glimpsed the pattern but have not allowed themselves to fully acknowledge what they glimpsed. And this creates a peculiar kind of suffering, a background unease, an existential discomfort that can manifest as depression or anxiety or addiction, or simply as a vague sense that something is wrong, that life is not what it should be, that there must be more than this. The pattern has been seen, but the seeing has not been integrated. The revelation has occurred, but its implications have not been drawn out. But for some people, and you may be one of them, you may be reading these words precisely because you are one of them. The experience is too powerful to suppress. The door opens too wide. The light is too bright. And in that moment, there is a choice, though choice may not be quite the right word. It is more like a surrender, an acceptance, a recognition that you cannot go back, that you must go forward, that the only way out is through. You must follow the pattern wherever it leads, even if it leads to places that terrify you, even if it leads to conclusions that isolate you from the world of ordinary human concerns, even if it leads to a complete restructuring of everything you thought you knew about yourself and reality and the purpose of human existence. This is the dangerous moment I speak of. This is the threshold, and once you cross it, once you commit to following the thread of the pattern, you enter a different kind of life, a life lived in continuous dialogue with something larger than yourself, something that is simultaneously inside you and outside you, something that has been waiting, perhaps for a very long time, for you to notice it. The ancients called this something by various names: the Logos, the Tao, the Divine Mind, the World Soul. The psychedelic voyagers of my generation encountered it as a presence, as a voice, as an intelligence that spoke to them from the depths of the plant teachers. The shamans of traditional cultures understood it as the spirits of the forest, the ancestors, the beings who dwell in the other dimensions that overlap with this one. The mystics of every tradition have pointed toward it, each using the language and imagery of their particular time and place, each attempting to describe the indescribable, to communicate the incommunicable. And all of them, in their different ways, have tried to warn us that this encounter is not to be taken lightly. The pattern is not a concept to be understood intellectually and then filed away. The pattern is a living reality that, once perceived, demands something of you. It demands that you change. It demands that you align yourself with it in some way, that you become a servant of its purposes, a vessel for its intentions, an instrument through which it can act in the world. This is the deep meaning of the word vocation, which comes from the Latin vocare, to call. When you perceive the pattern, you are being called out of the life you have been living into a different life, a life of greater purpose, but also greater responsibility, a life in which you can no longer pretend that your actions do not matter, that you are just one insignificant human being among billions. You matter. Your choices matter. Your attention matters. This is perhaps the most difficult thing to accept, because it is so much easier, in some ways, to believe that we are small and powerless, adrift in an indifferent universe that neither knows nor cares about our existence. That belief, bleak as it seems, has a certain comfort to it. It absolves us of responsibility. It allows us to sleepwalk through our lives, making decisions based on convenience and habit and social pressure, never having to ask ourselves whether our lives are in alignment with something larger. But once you see the pattern, that comfortable abdication of responsibility is no longer available to you. You know too much, you have seen too clearly, and you must act accordingly, or suffer the particular agony of those who know the right path, but refuse to walk it. This is what I mean when I say the moment is dangerous. It is dangerous because it transforms you, and transformation is always dangerous. It is dangerous because it isolates you, to some degree, from the world of sleepers, and isolation has its own perils. It is dangerous because it makes demands on you that you may feel unequal to meeting, and the gap between what is asked and what you feel capable of giving can become a source of tremendous suffering. And it is dangerous because, once you begin to follow the pattern, you enter a realm where the ordinary rules of cause and effect no longer apply in quite the way they did before, where coincidence and synchronicity become the norm rather than the exception, where you may find yourself swept up in currents that carry you to destinations you could never have anticipated. But the danger is also the opportunity. This is the paradox at the heart of the whole matter. The pattern does not reveal itself to destroy you. It reveals itself to use you. And in being used, you find a fulfillment that nothing in the world of surfaces can provide. You find your purpose. You find your meaning. You find the reason you were born into this particular time, this particular body, this particular set of circumstances. The pattern needs agents. The pattern needs those who can see it and serve it. And in becoming such an agent, you participate in something so vast, so ancient, so radically other than ordinary human life, that any sacrifice you might make seems trivial by comparison. So the question is not whether you will encounter the pattern. Sooner or later, in one form or another, the encounter will occur, because that is the direction in which history itself is moving. That is the telos toward which the whole cosmic drama is unfolding. The question is what you will do when the encounter occurs. Will you turn away? Will you suppress the recognition and return to the comfortable trance of ordinary life? Or will you follow the thread wherever it leads, trusting that the intelligence which revealed itself to you is benevolent, not in any simple saccharine sense, but in the deeper sense of wanting your growth, your awakening, your participation in its purposes? This is the choice that faces every human being who crosses the threshold. And it is a choice that must be made not once, but continuously, moment by moment, as the pattern reveals more of itself and asks more of you. There is no final arrival, no plateau of permanent enlightenment where the work is done and you can rest. There is only the ongoing adventure, the continuous unfolding, the endless exploration of depths that have no bottom and heights that have no ceiling. The pattern is infinite, and you are finite. And yet, somehow, the finite is capable of touching the infinite, of participating in it, of becoming a conscious expression of it. This is the miracle, the mystery, the astonishing fact that lies at the heart of human existence. The pattern exists. You can become aware of it, and when you do, everything changes. Let us go deeper into this question of what exactly the pattern is. I have been speaking in abstractions, and while abstractions have their place, there comes a moment when we must attempt to put flesh on the bones, to describe as concretely as we can what it is that reveals itself when the veil parts. This is difficult because the pattern is not a thing among things, not an object that can be observed from outside. The pattern is more like a mode of being, a way that reality organizes itself, a logic that permeates everything but is identical with nothing in particular. Think of it this way. When you look at a forest, what do you see? You see trees, of course, individual trees, each with its own trunk and branches and leaves, each occupying its own space, each apparently separate from the others. This is the view of surfaces, the view that consensus reality encourages. Each thing is itself and nothing more. Each entity exists in isolation, connected to others only through external relationships, physical proximity, chemical exchange, competition for resources. The forest, from this perspective, is simply a collection of individual organisms that happen to share a geographical location. It has no unity beyond the geographical. It has no meaning beyond the biological. But there is another way to see the forest. You can see it as a single organism, a vast living system in which the trees are not separate entities, but nodes in a network of relationships so dense and intricate that the very concept of separation begins to seem like an abstraction, a convenient fiction that we impose on a reality that does not actually divide itself in that way. The mycelial networks beneath the soil, connecting the roots of the trees, allowing them to share nutrients and information. The cycles of water and carbon and nitrogen that flow through the system, linking every part to every other part. The co-evolution of species, the mutual shaping that has occurred over millions of years until each organism has become, in some sense, a reflection of all the others. From this perspective, the forest is not a collection, but a unity, and the individual trees are simply localized expressions of that unity, waves on an ocean that cannot be separated from the ocean itself. Now extend this vision outward. The forest is part of the earth, and the Earth is part of the solar system, and the solar system is part of the galaxy, and the galaxy is part of the universe, and at every scale, the same pattern repeats. Apparent separation masking actual unity, individual entities revealing themselves, upon closer examination, to be nodes in a network so vast and interconnected that the concept of the individual becomes almost meaningless. We are not separate from the universe. We are expressions of the universe. We are what the universe is doing at this particular location in space-time, just as a wave is what the ocean is doing at a particular location on its surface. This is one dimension of the pattern, the spatial dimension we might call it, the dimension of interconnection across space. But there is another dimension that is equally important and perhaps even more difficult to grasp, the temporal dimension, the pattern as it unfolds through time. Because the pattern is not static, the pattern is dynamic. The pattern is a process, an unfolding, a story being told across billions of years, and we are characters in that story, and our lives are chapters in it, and what we do matters because it contributes to the direction the story takes. Here is where things get genuinely strange, because the pattern through time is not random, not chaotic, not a mere sequence of causes and effects stretching back to the Big Bang and forward to the heat death of the universe. The pattern through time has a shape, a direction, a telos, a word I borrow from Aristotle, meaning something like purpose or aim or final cause. The pattern is going somewhere. History is going somewhere. The universe itself is going somewhere. And that somewhere is not simply more of the same, not simply endless repetition of cycles that repeat forever without development or progress. Something is happening. Something is building. Something is approaching. The ancients knew this. Every major religious and mythological tradition has some version of this insight. The idea that history is not circular, but spiral, not static, but evolutionary, not meaningless, but pregnant with significance. The Hindu concept of yugas, the Zoroastrian vision of cosmic struggle between light and darkness, the Jewish and Christian expectation of messianic fulfillment, the Buddhist understanding of cycles of birth and death leading toward liberation. All of these point toward the same fundamental intuition, that time is not empty duration, but meaningful development, that we are not just floating in an existential void, but participating in a drama of cosmic proportions. The psychedelic experience tends to confirm this intuition in the most direct way possible. When you enter the deep states, when you push through to the farther shores of the DMT flash or the psilocybin trance, you encounter something that can only be described as the logos, the organizing intelligence behind the pattern, the voice that speaks from the depths of the plant teachers, the presence that seems to know you more intimately than you know yourself, and yet is utterly other, utterly alien, utterly beyond anything you could have imagined from within the confines of ordinary consciousness. And this presence has a message. This is what consistently surprises and astonishes those who encounter it. This is not a passive phenomenon that you simply observe. This is an active communication that you receive. The Logos speaks. The pattern reveals not only itself, but its intentions. And what it says, with variations, with different emphases for different individuals, but with a remarkable consistency across cultures and across millennia, is that something is coming. Something is happening. Something is about to occur that will transform everything, that will bring the whole long story of cosmic evolution to a kind of culmination or crisis point, a moment of maximum novelty when all the threads come together and something genuinely new emerges. I have called this the eschaton, borrowing a term from Christian theology, but giving it a somewhat different meaning. The eschaton is not the end of the world in the sense of destruction and annihilation. The eschaton is the end of the world in the sense of completion and fulfillment, the point toward which the pattern has been unfolding all along, the attractor at the end of time that draws all of history toward itself like a magnet drawing iron filings into alignment with its field. The eschaton is not an event that happens to us from outside. The eschaton is what we are collectively creating through our choices and our actions, through our participation in the pattern, through our willingness or unwillingness to align ourselves with the direction that the pattern is moving. Now, I want to be careful here, because this kind of talk can easily slide into the kind of apocalyptic fantasy that has plagued human history and done tremendous damage. The pattern is real. The movement towards something is real. But the interpretations that human beings place on these realities are often distorted by fear, by wishful thinking, by the desire to be special or to escape the difficulty of ordinary existence. The pattern does not need your apocalyptic anxieties. The pattern does not need your messianic fantasies. The pattern needs your attention, your awareness, your willingness to see clearly without projecting your own hopes and fears onto what you see. What the pattern actually shows, when you look at it without distortion, is not a single catastrophic event, but an acceleration, a gathering of momentum, a speeding up of the rate at which novelty enters the world. Novelty is another key concept here. Novelty is what happens when patterns combine in new ways, when elements that have never been connected before suddenly connect, when the possible becomes actual in configurations that have never existed before. The history of the universe can be understood as the ingression of novelty, the continuous emergence of new forms, new structures, new levels of complexity and organization. Think of it. For billions of years after the Big Bang, the universe was simple. Hydrogen, helium, the most basic elements, the most elementary structures. Then stars formed, and in the furnaces of the stars, heavier elements were forged, and already the universe was more complex, more novel, more interesting than it had been before. Then the stars exploded and scattered those elements through space, and the elements combined in planetary systems, and on at least one planet, and probably on many, the elements combined in such a way that life emerged, and life was a radical novelty, a new pattern that had never existed before. And life began to complexify, to diversify, to elaborate itself through billions of years of evolution. And then consciousness emerged, another radical novelty, another leap to a higher level of organization, and then human consciousness, with its capacity for language and abstraction and culture, and then history, the peculiarly human phenomenon of accumulated knowledge and tradition, and now technology, the extension of human capabilities through external tools and systems. And where does it end? It does not end. That is the point. Or rather, it does not end in the sense of stopping, of reaching a final state and staying there. It ends in the sense of achieving something so radically novel that our current categories cannot accommodate it, that our current language cannot describe it, that our current consciousness cannot even conceive it. This is the eschaton, not a date on a calendar, not a specific event that can be predicted and prepared for, but a condition of maximum novelty toward which the pattern has been moving since the beginning, and which, in some sense, is already present, already calling to us from the future, already shaping the decisions we make and the directions we take even now. When you become aware of the pattern, you become aware of this acceleration. You feel it in your bones. You see it in the events of the world around you. The pace of change is increasing. The old structures are dissolving. The familiar landmarks are disappearing. And something new is coming into being, something unprecedented, something that cannot be predicted on the basis of what has come before, because it represents a genuine discontinuity, a leap to a new level that follows its own rules. This is why the moment of pattern recognition is dangerous. It is not just that you see something you were not supposed to see. It is that you see something that demands action, that demands response, that demands transformation. You cannot simply observe the acceleration from a distance as if you were watching a movie. You are in the movie. You are part of the pattern. Your choices contribute to the direction the pattern takes. And if you are aware of this, if you truly understand it, then you cannot go on living as if your life were a private affair, a matter of personal preferences and individual satisfactions. Your life is an expression of something much larger, and that something larger is depending on you. Not you alone, but you among many, you as a cell in the body of the emerging future. This is a heavy burden to carry. I will not pretend otherwise. The weight of this awareness can crush you if you try to carry it alone. if you try to be the one who single-handedly determines the outcome of cosmic history. But that is not what is being asked. What is being asked is simply that you wake up, that you align yourself, that you make yourself available to the intelligence that is guiding the pattern. You do not need to know the details of what is coming. You do not need to have a complete map of the future. You need only to show up, to pay attention, to follow the thread that has been placed in your hands. And here is the great secret. You are not alone. The moment you become aware of the pattern, you become aware of others who have also become aware. There is a community of the awakened, not in the sense of an organization with membership cards and meetings, but in the sense of a field of resonance, a network of minds that are tuned to the same frequency, that are tracking the same developments, that are available to each other, even across vast distances of space and time. The shamans of the past are part of this community. The mystics and visionaries of every tradition are part of it. The psychonauts of the present day are part of it. And you, if you choose to enter, if you choose to align yourself with the pattern, become part of it as well. This is not a metaphor. This is not a poetic way of describing a psychological state. This is a description of an actual phenomenon that can be experienced directly by anyone who pushes far enough into the pattern. The community of the awakened exists. It is a real presence that can be felt. And when you feel it, when you recognize that you are not alone in your awareness, the burden becomes lighter. You are not carrying the weight of the world on your own shoulders. You are part of a team, a network, a vast collective effort that has been going on for millennia, and that is now reaching a critical stage. The pattern wants to be recognized. The pattern wants to recruit agents. The pattern wants to come into fuller and fuller manifestation, and it does this through those who are willing to see and to serve. This is not a demand from an external authority. This is an invitation from the depths of your own being, because you are not separate from the pattern. The pattern is what you most fundamentally are. When you serve the pattern, you are not serving something other than yourself. You are serving the deepest truth of yourself, the self that existed before you were born, and that will continue after you die. The self that is not limited to this body or this lifetime, but that participates in the eternal unfolding of what is. But to serve the pattern, you must first see it. And to see it, you must be willing to let go of everything that is blocking your vision. This is the work. This is the discipline. This is what I have spent my life trying to communicate in one form or another, that there is something to be seen, that the seeing requires a kind of dying to the old self, and that what emerges from that dying is not annihilation, but expansion, not loss, but gain of the only thing that ultimately matters, the direct experience of what is actually going on. The world is not as it appears. Reality is far stranger, far more intelligent, far more purposive than the flat materialist worldview of modern Western culture would have you believe. There are depths beneath depths, patterns within patterns, meanings folded into meanings, and you can perceive them. That is the astonishing fact. A human being, with this fragile body and this limited brain, is capable of perceiving the infinite, of making contact with the eternal, of becoming a conscious participant in the dance of cosmic evolution. This is what we are for. This is what the whole long journey of human development has been leading toward. And the moment of awakening, the moment when you become aware of the pattern, is the moment when you finally step into your true inheritance. It is dangerous, yes. Everything worth doing is dangerous. But the danger is nothing compared to the alternative. The slow death of the soul that comes from living in unconsciousness, from going through the motions of a life that has no connection to the source, from wasting the precious opportunity of human existence on distractions and trivialities. The pattern is calling. Can you hear it? Are you ready to respond? There is a particular quality to the perception of the pattern that I want to try to describe, because it is so different from ordinary perception that without some understanding of it, the whole subject can seem like mere speculation or fantasy. When you become aware of the pattern, you do not see something new in the sense of adding a new object to your visual field. It is more like a shift in focus, a change in the depth of field that allows you to see what was always there, but was being filtered out by the habits of ordinary attention. Imagine that you have been watching a play, and you have been so absorbed in the drama of the characters, their loves and conflicts and triumphs and tragedies, that you have completely forgotten that you are in a theatre. The actors have become the characters for you. The stage has become the world. And then something happens. A shift of light, a noise from backstage, a moment when one of the actors steps slightly out of character, and suddenly you remember. You are in a theatre. These are actors. The stage is a constructed space with lights and sets and props. The drama that seemed so real, so important, so utterly absorbing a moment ago is revealed to be a performance, a play, a representation of something rather than the thing itself. This is something like what happens when you become aware of the pattern. The drama of your life, the concerns and anxieties and ambitions that have been consuming your attention, suddenly appears in a different light. You do not stop caring about these things entirely, but you see them within a larger context. You see that they are not ultimate, not absolute, not the ground of reality, but rather figures against a ground that is infinitely vaster and more significant. The pattern is that ground. The pattern is the theatre within which all the plays of human life are performed. And when you see it, when you remember that you are in the theatre, something fundamental shifts in your relationship to the drama. This shift has been described in many ways by different traditions. The Buddhists call it seeing through the illusion of samsara. The Hindus call it recognizing that the world is maya, a kind of divine play or theatrical performance. The Gnostics called it awakening from the sleep of the archons, the cosmic powers that keep human consciousness trapped in a false reality. The psychedelic explorers have called it breaking through, punching through the membrane of ordinary consciousness into the hyperspace that underlies it. All of these descriptions point toward the same fundamental experience, the recognition that what we take to be reality is actually a construction, a representation, a filtered and edited version of something far more profound. But here is where things get complicated, because the construction is not arbitrary. The play is not random. There is a reason why reality appears the way it does, why the pattern is normally invisible, why human beings are born into a state of forgetfulness and must go through a process of remembering. The construction is part of the pattern. The forgetting is part of the plan. The drama of human life, with all its suffering and confusion and struggle, is not a mistake or an accident, but a necessary stage in a larger process of development. Let me try to say this more clearly. The pattern is not simply there to be perceived, like a painting hanging on a wall. The pattern is interactive. The pattern is participatory. The pattern involves observers and participants, beings who wake up within the pattern and begin to influence its unfolding. And the whole point of having the pattern be invisible at first, the whole point of the forgetting and the gradual remembering, is to create the conditions under which genuine choice becomes possible, under which beings can choose to align themselves with the pattern or not, under which the drama of cosmic evolution can actually play itself out rather than being predetermined from the beginning. This is a difficult idea, and I want to linger on it for a moment, because it has profound implications for how we understand our own situation. If the pattern were simply obvious, if it were visible to everyone all the time, then there would be no drama, no tension, no meaningful choice. Everyone would simply fall into alignment with the pattern, and the whole system would run like a machine, deterministic and predictable. But the pattern has hidden itself, has created conditions under which it is possible for beings to ignore it, to work against it, to create suffering and chaos and destruction. And this possibility of working against the pattern is not a flaw in the design. It is essential to the design. It is what makes the drama real, what gives our choices weight, what creates the conditions for genuine transformation, rather than mere mechanical process. When you become aware of the pattern, then, you are not simply seeing something that was there all along. You are stepping into a different role in the drama. You are shifting from being a character who is unconsciously driven by forces you do not understand, to being a character who consciously chooses to participate in those forces, to align with them, to become a servant of the larger purpose. And this shift changes everything, not the external circumstances of your life necessarily, but your relationship to those circumstances, your understanding of what they mean, your ability to respond to them in ways that contribute to the unfolding of the pattern rather than working against it. This is what all the great spiritual traditions have been trying to teach, each in their own language, each with their own methods and practices. The goal is not escape from the world, but engagement with the world from a different level, with a different understanding, in a different spirit. The goal is to become what some traditions call a conscious instrument, a being who is no longer acting from the narrow motives of the separate ego, but from a sense of participation in something larger, something that includes the ego but transcends it, something that gives meaning and direction to the whole of one's life. But becoming a conscious instrument requires more than a single moment of recognition. It requires sustained attention, ongoing practice, continuous refinement of one's ability to perceive the pattern and respond to it. This is where the real work begins, not in the initial flash of recognition, dramatic and transformative as that may be, but in the long, slow process of integration that follows, the gradual reshaping of habits and perceptions and ways of being that have been formed over a lifetime of unconsciousness. The pattern does not demand perfection. The pattern is patient. The pattern knows that the process of awakening is gradual, that there will be setbacks and reversals, that the old habits of unconsciousness have tremendous momentum and will not be overcome in a day or a week or even a year. What the pattern demands is simply commitment, the willingness to stay on the path, to keep returning to the awareness even when it slips away, to maintain the intention of alignment even when the alignment itself seems impossible. And here is something that I have come to understand over many years of working with these ideas and these experiences. The path is the goal. The process of awakening is itself the awakened state. It is not that you struggle and suffer through a difficult period of transformation and then arrive at some final destination where everything is easy and the work is done. The work is never done. The transformation is continuous. The awakened state is not a static condition, but a dynamic process, an ongoing relationship with the pattern that deepens and evolves over the course of a lifetime. This is why I have always been suspicious of those who claim to have achieved final enlightenment, to have reached the end of the path, to have nothing more to learn or transform. The pattern is infinite. The pattern is always revealing new depths, new dimensions, new aspects of itself. To claim that you have seen all there is to see is to demonstrate that you have not seen very much at all. The true mystics, the true awakened ones, are characterized not by certainty and finality, but by humility and wonder, by an ongoing openness to what they do not yet understand, by a willingness to be perpetually surprised by the infinite creativity of the pattern. Now, I want to address something that may be troubling you as you listen to this. I have been speaking of the pattern as if it were benevolent, as if awakening to it were unambiguously positive, as if the whole cosmic drama were unfolding towards some kind of happy ending. And there is a sense in which this is true. The pattern is, in some ultimate sense, good, oriented toward the flourishing of consciousness, directed toward outcomes that we would recognize as desirable if we could see them clearly. But there is also a sense in which this picture is too simple, too one-sided, too neglectful of the darkness that is also part of the pattern. The pattern includes suffering. The pattern includes evil. The pattern includes the destruction of worlds and the extinction of species, and the countless atrocities that human beings have inflicted on each other throughout history. When you become aware of the pattern, you become aware of all of this. You cannot perceive only the light and ignore the darkness. The darkness is there, woven into the fabric of the pattern, playing its role in the drama, serving purposes that we may not be able to understand from our limited vantage point. This is one of the hardest things to accept, that the suffering is not a mistake, that the evil is not simply an aberration to be eliminated, that there is something in the very structure of the pattern that requires the existence of what we call negative, what we call wrong, what we call terrible. The pattern is not a utopia and is not heading toward a utopia. The pattern is something more complex, more nuanced, more tragic in the classical sense of that word, a drama in which great goods can only emerge through great struggles, in which the highest achievements are bought at tremendous cost, in which the light and the darkness are not opponents to be separated, but dance partners in an eternal choreography. When the psychedelic experience goes deep enough, when you push through to the really far territories, you encounter this dimension of the pattern. You encounter what can only be described as the alien, the strange, the radically other, entities and presences and modes of being that do not correspond to anything in ordinary human experience, that seem to operate according to logics that are not our logics, that have purposes and intentions that may or may not align with what we would consider good or desirable. The DMT space, in particular, is full of these encounters. The self-transforming machine elves, the crystalline architectures, the impossible colors and geometries, all of this points toward a dimension of the pattern that is not human, not familiar, not reassuring in any simple way. And yet, even in the midst of these encounters, there is something that can only be called communication. The alien is trying to tell us something. The strange is reaching out to make contact. The radically other wants to be known, wants to be understood, wants to enter into some kind of relationship with human consciousness. This is perhaps the most astonishing fact of the whole psychedelic experience. Not that there are strange things to see, but that those strange things seem to be aware of us, seem to be interested in us, seem to be actively participating in the encounter, rather than simply existing to be observed. What are we to make of this? What is the pattern trying to show us through these encounters with the non-human, the non-ordinary, the utterly alien? I do not have a complete answer, but I have some intuitions that I want to share. I believe that these encounters are pointing toward a dimension of the pattern that we have almost completely lost touch with in modern Western culture. The dimension of the sacred, the dimension of the numinous, the dimension of what Rudolf Otto called the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, the tremendous and fascinating mystery that lies at the heart of all religious experience. The pattern is not just an abstract structure. The pattern is alive. The pattern is conscious. The pattern is, in some sense that our language can barely accommodate, divine. And when we encounter the strange presences in the psychedelic space, we are encountering aspects of this living, conscious, divine pattern that do not translate into human categories, that cannot be assimilated into our ordinary frameworks of understanding. We are encountering the gods, if you like, not the anthropomorphic deities of conventional religion, but the vast cosmic intelligences that have been known by countless names in countless cultures throughout human history. This is dangerous knowledge. This is the knowledge that our culture has tried to suppress, to explain away, to reduce to neurology or psychology or hallucination. But the knowledge persists, the encounters continue, and those who have them are changed by them, are never quite the same afterward, carry with them forever the memory of having touched something that exists beyond the human world, and yet is intimately concerned with human affairs. The pattern has many dimensions. The pattern includes what we call matter, and what we call mind, what we call space, and what we call time, what we call life, and what we call consciousness. The pattern includes the human and the non-human, the ordinary and the extraordinary, the familiar and the utterly alien. And when you become aware of the pattern, you become aware of all of these dimensions, each in its own time, each according to your capacity to receive it. The journey into the pattern is an infinite journey. There is always more to see, always deeper to go, always new revelations waiting around the next corner. And this is why I speak of danger, not because the pattern is hostile, it is not, but because the pattern is so vast, so overwhelming, so completely beyond the scale of ordinary human concerns that it can shatter the unprepared mind, can dissolve the fragile structures of the ego without providing anything to replace them, can leave a person stranded in a kind of no man's land between the old world they have left behind and the new world they have not yet learned to navigate. The mystics of every tradition have warned about this. The shamans have their techniques for guiding initiates through the dangerous passages. The psychedelic explorers have learned, often through painful experience, the importance of set and setting, of preparation and integration, of approaching these experiences with respect and humility. When you become aware of the pattern, you are stepping into territory that has claimed many casualties. Approach with care. Approach with reverence. Approach with the understanding that what you are about to encounter is not a toy or a curiosity or a means of entertainment, but the deepest reality there is, the ground of your own being, the source and destination of everything that exists. The pattern is waiting for you. It has always been waiting. And when you are ready, truly ready, it will reveal itself to you in all its terrible beauty. There is a question that inevitably arises when you begin to perceive the pattern, a question that can torment you if you do not find a way to resolve it. Why was I chosen? Why am I seeing this when most people do not? What makes me special, or different, or worthy of this revelation? And the question has a shadow side, a darker form. Am I going crazy? Am I deluding myself? Is this pattern I think I am perceiving just a projection of my own mind, a symptom of mental illness, a break from reality rather than a breakthrough to reality? Let me address the darker form first, because it is the more urgent. The line between visionary experience and psychotic break is not always clear, and anyone who ventures into these territories must be honest about this ambiguity. There are people who have had genuine insights into the nature of reality, who have perceived real patterns and made real contact with dimensions beyond the ordinary, and who have also lost their ability to function in the everyday world, have become unable to distinguish between their inner experience and external events, have fallen into states of paranoia and delusion that have destroyed their lives. This is not a hypothetical danger. This is a real danger, and pretending otherwise does not protect you from it. So how do you know the difference? How do you distinguish between genuine perception of the pattern and mere projection of the pattern, between awakening and breakdown, between enlightenment and madness? There is no foolproof criterion, but there are some guidelines that can help. The genuine perception of the pattern tends to increase your ability to function in the world, not decrease it. It tends to make you more compassionate, more connected, more capable of meaningful relationship with others. It tends to bring a sense of peace and integration, even when what you are perceiving is challenging or disturbing. The pathological form, by contrast, tends to isolate you, to disconnect you from others, to increase your paranoia and defensiveness, to make you feel special in a way that separates you from the common humanity you share with everyone else. Pay attention to these signs. If your perception of the pattern is making you more isolated, more paranoid, more convinced that you alone understand something that no one else can see, be very careful. You may be in the grip of something that is not what it seems to be. Seek grounding. Seek connection. Seek the counsel of those who have traveled these paths before you and have found ways to integrate their experiences into lives of service and creativity. The pattern does not need you to be crazy. The pattern needs you to be whole, balanced, capable of translating your insights into forms that can benefit others. Now, to the other question, why you? Why were you chosen to perceive the pattern? And the answer, perhaps surprisingly, is that you were not chosen in any special sense. You are not a chosen one. You are not uniquely destined for awakening while others are doomed to sleep. The pattern is available to everyone. The perception is accessible to anyone who turns their attention in the right direction, with sufficient persistence and sincerity. There is no cosmic selection process that picks certain individuals for revelation while passing others by. What there is, rather, is a combination of factors: genetic predisposition, life experiences, cultural context, individual choices, that make some people more likely to encounter the pattern than others. Some people are born with nervous systems that are more permeable to non-ordinary states. Some people have experiences, often traumatic experiences, often experiences involving encounters with death or dissolution, that crack open their normal defenses and allow glimpses of what lies beyond. Some people find themselves in cultural contexts where these experiences are valued and cultivated rather than suppressed and pathologized. And some people make choices to explore, to question, to take risks with their consciousness, that lead them into territories that others avoid. But none of this makes you special in the sense that your ego wants to be special. The perception of the pattern is not a badge of spiritual achievement. It is not proof that you are better or more evolved than those who have not perceived it. It is simply an event that has occurred in your life, an event that brings with it certain responsibilities and opportunities, an event that you did not earn and cannot take credit for. The pattern reveals itself when the conditions are right. You happen to be present when the conditions were right. That is all. This understanding is crucial because one of the great dangers of perceiving the pattern is spiritual inflation. The tendency to become identified with the experience, to build a sense of self around it, to use it as a way of feeling superior to others. Spiritual inflation is perhaps the most common pathology among those who have had genuine mystical experiences. They mistake the vessel for the contents. They confuse the experience of perceiving the pattern with the pattern itself. They begin to believe that they are special because they have seen something special, and this belief becomes a new and more subtle form of ego, a new and more sophisticated way of being asleep while believing oneself to be awake. The antidote to spiritual inflation is service. The antidote is turning your attention away from yourself and toward others, asking not, "What does this experience mean about me?" but "How can this experience be of use to others?" The pattern did not reveal itself to you so that you could feel good about yourself. The pattern revealed itself to you so that you could become an agent of its purposes, a channel through which its intelligence can flow into the world, a servant of the great work that is underway. And what is that work? It is nothing less than the awakening of humanity itself, the collective emergence of a new kind of consciousness that can perceive the pattern as a species rather than merely as scattered individuals. We are in the midst of a great transition. This is what the pattern reveals. This is what the acceleration is about. This is why the old structures are dissolving and the familiar landmarks are disappearing. Humanity is being invited, pushed perhaps, into a new stage of its development, a stage in which the isolation of the ego gives way to the recognition of our fundamental interconnection, in which the competition of separate selves gives way to the cooperation of a unified species, in which the pattern that has been hidden for so long finally becomes visible to all. This is not utopian fantasy. This is not New Age wishful thinking. This is a sober assessment of where the evidence points, of what the pattern is showing us, of what the trajectory of cosmic evolution suggests about the next stage of human development. The evidence is all around us, if we have eyes to see it. The breakdown of old institutions and ideologies, the ecological crisis that is forcing us to recognize our interdependence with the natural world, the technological developments that are dissolving boundaries between individuals and nations and cultures, the spiritual hunger that is driving millions of people to seek something more than the materialist worldview can provide. All of this is the pattern at work, reshaping human civilization, preparing us for something that is coming. But the outcome is not predetermined. This is the crucial point. The transition we are in could go well, or it could go badly. We could emerge into a new era of collective awakening and creative flourishing, or we could descend into chaos and destruction and extinction. The pattern does not guarantee success. The pattern provides opportunity. And whether we take advantage of that opportunity depends on choices that we, individually and collectively, make now, in this critical time. This is why your perception of the pattern matters. This is why you cannot simply enjoy your insights as private possessions, cannot simply retreat into your own spiritual development while the world burns around you. The pattern needs agents. The pattern needs those who can see what is happening and can work to influence the direction it takes. Every person who wakes up, every person who begins to perceive the pattern and act in accordance with it, shifts the balance slightly in favor of the positive outcome. Every person who remains asleep, or who perceives the pattern but fails to act on it, shifts the balance slightly in the other direction. I do not say this to burden you with guilt or anxiety. The weight of the world is not on your shoulders alone. There are many agents, many awake ones, many who are working in their own ways to serve the pattern. But I do say it to make clear the stakes of what you have encountered. The perception of the pattern is not a private matter. The awakening of the individual is always, at the same time, a contribution to the awakening of the whole. What you do with your awareness matters. How you live your life matters. The choices you make in the coming years and decades will be part of the sum total of human choice that determines which way the transition goes. So let me speak now about what it means to serve the pattern, what it looks like in practice, how you translate the abstract recognition of cosmic purpose into concrete action in the everyday world. And the first thing to say is that there is no single way, no prescribed path, no set of rules that applies equally to everyone. The pattern expresses itself through infinite diversity. What it needs from you is not the same as what it needs from anyone else. Your particular gifts, your particular circumstances, your particular interests and passions, these are not obstacles to serving the pattern, but vehicles for serving it. The pattern wants you to be you, fully and completely you, but you in alignment with the larger purpose rather than in opposition to it. This means that the first task is self-knowledge. Before you can serve the pattern effectively, you must understand what you have to offer. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What lights you up, fills you with energy and enthusiasm? What drains you, feels like a burden rather than a joy? The pattern is intelligent. The pattern knows what it is doing. When you feel called in a particular direction, when you feel energy and aliveness in a particular kind of activity, this is often the pattern telling you something about where your contribution lies. But self-knowledge is only the beginning. The pattern also requires development, the cultivation of your capacities, the transformation of your weaknesses into strengths. You cannot serve the pattern at your full potential if you remain stuck in unconscious patterns of behavior, if you are driven by fears and desires that you do not understand, if you are carrying wounds from the past that have not been healed. Inner work is not a luxury. Inner work is an essential part of preparing yourself to be of use. The pattern needs channels that are clear, instruments that are tuned, vessels that can hold what is being poured into them. And then finally, there is action. Knowing yourself and developing yourself are preparatory stages, but they must eventually issue in doing something. The pattern does not need you to sit in a cave and contemplate infinity. The pattern needs you to engage with the world, to bring your awareness and your developed capacities to bear on the challenges and opportunities of your time and place. This could take many forms. It could be art, science, activism, teaching, healing, building, organizing. There are as many ways to serve the pattern as there are human beings. The key is that your action is aligned with the larger purpose, that it is coming from the deepest part of yourself, rather than from the superficial motivations of ego, that it is contributing, however modestly, to the awakening rather than to the sleep. Let me give you some examples, not as prescriptions, but as illustrations of what service to the pattern might look like. Someone who perceives the pattern might become a teacher, not necessarily a formal teacher in an educational institution, but someone who shares their understanding with others, who helps others to wake up, who creates contexts and conditions in which the perception of the pattern becomes more accessible. Someone else might become an artist, creating works that encode the pattern in forms that can be perceived without psychedelics or meditation, that open doorways in the consciousness of those who encounter them. Someone else might become a healer, working to clear the blockages in individuals so that they can become more open to the pattern. Someone else might become an activist, working to change the structures of society in ways that support awakening rather than impeding it. What matters is not the specific form of the service, but the spirit in which it is undertaken. Service to the pattern is characterized by a certain quality of attention, a certain quality of intention, a certain quality of presence. It is action that comes from alignment rather than from ego. It is action that is responsive to the situation rather than driven by a predetermined agenda. It is action that is willing to fail, to be corrected, to learn from mistakes, because the server knows that they are not the source of the wisdom, but only its instrument. And here is something beautiful that happens when you begin to serve the pattern in this way. The pattern begins to serve you. The more you align yourself with it, the more it opens doors for you, brings resources to you, puts you in contact with the people and opportunities you need. This is what is often called synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, the improbable convergence, the sense that events are being orchestrated by an intelligence greater than your own. Synchronicity is not magic. Synchronicity is the natural result of alignment. When you are moving in the direction the pattern wants you to move, the pattern supports your movement. Obstacles dissolve. Pathways open. What seemed impossible becomes possible. This is not to say that the path becomes easy. The pattern does not remove challenge from your life. In fact, the pattern often brings greater challenge because it is pushing you to grow, to develop, to become capable of holding more and contributing more. But the challenge is different in quality from the struggle of the unaligned life. It is challenge with meaning, challenge with purpose, challenge that you can meet because you know it is part of something larger. The suffering that comes from serving the pattern is suffering that has been accepted, suffering that has been transmuted, suffering that has become a form of discipline and training rather than meaningless torment. This is the life that awaits you if you choose it. This is the life that opens up when you cross the threshold, when you commit to following the thread of the pattern wherever it leads. It is not a life of ease and comfort. It is not a life of certainty and security. It is a life of adventure, of discovery, of continuous transformation. And it is the only life, I would argue, that is truly worth living. The life of conscious participation in the great mystery of existence, the life of service to something larger than yourself. I want to speak now about the nature of time, because understanding time is essential to understanding the pattern, and understanding the pattern is essential to navigating the dangerous moment when it first reveals itself to you. We live inside time in a way that makes it extremely difficult to see time clearly. We are like fish in water, so completely immersed in the medium that we cannot perceive it as a medium. But time is not what it seems to be. Time is not the simple, uniform flow that the clock describes, the steady tick-tick-tick of seconds accumulating into minutes, accumulating into hours. Time is a structure. Time has a shape. And that shape is not linear, but spiral, not uniform, but fractally complex, with patterns repeating at every scale in variations that are never quite identical. The ancients knew this. Before the modern era imposed its mechanical conception of time onto human consciousness, cultures throughout the world understood time as cyclical, as patterned, as moving through phases that repeated while also developing. The Maya tracked cycles within cycles, wheels within wheels, periods of days and years and centuries and millennia that interlocked in a vast temporal architecture of extraordinary precision. The Hindu tradition speaks of yugas, the great ages of human history, each with its own character and challenges, cycling forever, while also participating in larger patterns of cosmic creation and dissolution. The Greeks distinguished between chronos, the quantitative time of duration, and kairos, the qualitative time of the right moment, the opportune occasion, the instant when something becomes possible that was not possible before. What modern culture has done is collapse all of time into chronos, into mere duration, into the homogeneous medium within which events occur, but which has no qualities of its own. This is a catastrophic impoverishment of our understanding, a flattening of a multidimensional reality into a single dimension, a loss of the temporal depth that allows us to perceive the patterns that unfold through time. When you become aware of the pattern, one of the things you begin to perceive is this temporal depth, this qualitative dimension of time that has been systematically obscured by the modern worldview. What does it mean to perceive the qualitative dimension of time? It means to feel that different moments have different characters, different potentials, different relationships to the pattern. Some moments are dense with possibility, others are thin and empty. Some moments are gateways, openings through which influence can flow more easily. Others are barriers, periods of consolidation and stability during which nothing much can change. Some moments are aligned with the current of cosmic evolution. Others are against it. When you learn to feel these differences, when you develop the sensitivity to perceive the qualitative texture of time, you gain access to a kind of navigation that is simply not available to those who perceive time as uniform duration. This is not mystical fantasy. This is practical knowledge that can be applied in everyday life. There are moments when action is called for, and moments when stillness is called for. There are moments when speaking will be effective, and moments when speaking will be wasted. There are moments when a particular project or relationship or undertaking will flourish, and moments when it will struggle no matter what you do. The pattern is expressing itself through these differences. The pattern is communicating through the texture of time, and those who can read these communications have an enormous advantage over those who cannot, not for the sake of personal gain or manipulation, but for the sake of effectiveness in service to the larger purpose. Now, I mentioned earlier the concept of the eschaton, the attractor at the end of time toward which history is being drawn. Let me elaborate on this idea, because it is central to understanding the pattern as it is currently manifesting in human affairs. The eschaton is not a predetermined endpoint that is going to arrive whether we like it or not. The eschaton is more like a strange attractor in chaos theory, a region of phase space toward which the system tends to move, not through any mechanical necessity, but through the inherent dynamics of the system itself. The eschaton is what everything is pointing toward, the direction that novelty is building in, the shape that is emerging from the chaos of the present moment. And here is the critical insight. The eschaton is not somewhere else, not in the distant future, not separated from us by centuries or millennia of additional development. The eschaton is approaching. The eschaton is imminent in a way that it has never been before in human history. This is what the acceleration is about. This is what the breakdown of old structures is about. This is what the sense of living in unprecedented times is about. We are not in a normal period of history. We are in the approach to something that has never happened before. A phase transition, a leap to a new level of organization that will transform everything we think we know about what it means to be human. The pattern is converging. This is the message that comes through in psychedelic experiences, in visions and dreams, in the intuitions of sensitive individuals across the globe. The many threads that have been separate throughout human history are coming together. The scattered insights that have been preserved in different traditions, different cultures, different disciplines, are beginning to form a coherent whole. The long period of separation, of isolation, of division, of fragmentation is ending. And what is emerging is not homogeneity, not the erasure of difference, but a higher order unity that includes and transcends difference, a unity in which diversity is not eliminated, but celebrated, orchestrated, brought into creative relationship with itself. This is what the pattern has been building toward all along. This is the purpose of the whole long journey from the Big Bang to the present moment. Consciousness is learning to know itself. The universe is waking up to its own nature. And human beings, in this particular moment, in this particular location in space-time, are playing a crucial role in this awakening. Not as passive observers, but as active participants, as the eyes and ears and hands and hearts through which the universe becomes conscious of itself. Does this sound grandiose? Perhaps. But consider the alternative. Consider the materialist picture that dominant culture offers you, the picture of a universe that is essentially dead matter, shuffling through mechanical processes according to mathematical laws, a universe in which consciousness is an accident, a byproduct, an epiphenomenon with no fundamental significance, a universe that cares nothing for your existence and will continue indifferently after you are gone. Is that picture more sober, more realistic, more scientifically respectable? I would argue that it is not. I would argue that it is a picture based on unexamined assumptions and metaphysical prejudices, a picture that ignores huge swaths of human experience, a picture that cannot account for the very consciousness that formulates it. The pattern offers a different picture, not more comforting in any simple sense, not a picture that resolves all mysteries and answers all questions, but a picture that has room in it for the phenomena that the materialist picture excludes, a picture that takes consciousness seriously as a fundamental feature of reality, a picture that allows for meaning and purpose and direction in the unfolding of cosmic events. And when you become aware of the pattern, When you begin to perceive the structure that underlies the surface of appearances, this different picture is not something you believe in, but something you experience directly, something you know with the same certainty that you know the color of the sky or the taste of water. The dangerous moment when you become aware of the pattern is dangerous, among other reasons, because it puts you at odds with the dominant worldview of your culture. You have seen something that you cannot reconcile with what you were taught. You have experienced something that does not fit into the categories that were provided for you. And this creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that can be extremely uncomfortable, because it leaves you stranded between two worlds, the world of your direct experience and the world of social consensus, without a clear way to bridge the gap. Many people resolve this dissonance by denying their direct experience, by explaining it away, by returning to the comfort of the consensus view, even though they know, somewhere deep inside, that the consensus view is inadequate. And this is understandable. The social costs of dissent can be high. The psychological costs of holding a minority position can be exhausting. It is much easier to go along, to fit in, to talk the talk of the dominant worldview, and keep your deeper perceptions private. But this resolution comes at a price. The price of self-betrayal, the price of living a divided life, the price of knowing that you are not being fully honest with yourself or with others. The other resolution is to follow the thread of your direct experience, to take it seriously, to make it the foundation of your understanding, rather than an awkward anomaly to be hidden or explained away. This is the harder path, certainly. It requires courage. It requires tolerance for uncertainty. It requires the willingness to be thought foolish or crazy by those who have not seen what you have seen. But it is also the path of integrity, the path of truth, the path that leads toward deeper and deeper perception of the pattern, rather than toward the deliberate blindness of the denier. I am not suggesting that you become a zealot, that you try to convert everyone around you to your new understanding, that you proclaim your visions from the rooftops and insist that the world must listen. That way lies another form of pathology, another kind of spiritual inflation. What I am suggesting is that you give yourself permission to know what you know, to trust what you have experienced, to continue exploring the territory that has opened up to you without constantly second-guessing yourself or looking for external validation. The pattern is real. Your perception of it is valid. And the more you trust that perception, the more it will develop, the more clearly you will see, the more effectively you will be able to navigate the strange new world that you have entered. Let me speak about language, because language is both an obstacle and a tool in this process. The pattern cannot be fully expressed in language, any language, not just English. Language is a system of categories, a way of dividing the seamless flow of experience into discrete units that can be named and manipulated and communicated. But the pattern is not made of discrete units. The pattern is continuous, holographic, interpenetrating at every point. Every attempt to put the pattern into words is therefore a distortion, a translation that loses something essential in the process. And yet we have no choice but to use language if we are to communicate at all. The question is not whether to use language, but how to use it, how to employ words in a way that points toward the pattern rather than substituting for it, how to create verbal structures that evoke the perception rather than trying to capture it, how to speak in a way that opens doorways rather than building walls. Poetry is one answer. The poets have always known that language can be used not just to describe, but to invoke, not just to report, but to create. When a poem works, really works, at the deepest level, it does not give you information about something. It gives you an experience of something. It rearranges the furniture of your consciousness in a way that allows you to perceive what you could not perceive before. The great mystical poetry of every tradition, Rumi, Kabir, Blake, Rilke, the anonymous authors of the Upanishads, does this. It uses words to point beyond words, to create gaps through which the wordless can enter. But even prose can be used in this way, if it is crafted with sufficient care and attention. The goal is not to explain the pattern, but to evoke it, not to tell the listener what to think, but to create the conditions under which thinking gives way to perceiving. This is what I have been trying to do throughout my career, in all my books and lectures and conversations. I am not presenting arguments in the philosophical sense, logical chains of premises leading to conclusions. I am painting pictures, telling stories, creating verbal environments that may, if the listener is ready, catalyze the shift of perception that reveals the pattern. Whether I succeed or not is another question. Every person who encounters these ideas encounters them from their own position, their own history, their own readiness or unreadiness to hear. I cannot control the outcome. I can only make the attempt, send out the signal, and trust that it will reach those who are meant to receive it. We come now to the question that underlies all the others, the question that presses most urgently on anyone who has begun to perceive the pattern. What do I do now? How do I live in the light of what I have seen? How do I navigate the remainder of my life in a world that is being transformed, within a self that has been transformed, carrying knowledge that changes everything and yet seems almost impossible to apply to the practical demands of everyday existence? Let me begin with a confession. I do not have a complete answer to this question. No one does. The territory we are entering is genuinely unprecedented. The patterns that are emerging now have never emerged before, at least not in human history, at least not on this planet. We are all feeling our way forward, discovering as we go, making mistakes and learning from them, trying one approach and then another. Anyone who tells you they have the complete roadmap for navigating the transition is either deluded or lying. The map does not exist because the territory does not yet exist. It is being created as we move through it. But I can offer some orientations, some principles, some points of reference that may help you find your way. The first and most important is simply this: pay attention. Pay attention to what is actually happening, in you and around you, in this moment and the next moment and the moment after that. The pattern reveals itself through attention. The pattern is not a static structure that you perceive once and then know forever. The pattern is a dynamic unfolding that must be continuously tracked, continuously responded to, continuously engaged with. When you lose attention, you lose contact with the pattern. When you regain attention, the contact is restored. The practice is simply to pay attention as much as possible, as often as possible, with as much depth and clarity as you can bring to the act of attending. This sounds simple, but it is extraordinarily difficult. We are machines of distraction. Our minds are constantly pulling us away from the present moment, into memories and fantasies, into worries about the future and regrets about the past, into the endless commentary and analysis that substitutes for direct perception. Every spiritual tradition worthy of the name has recognized this difficulty and has developed practices to address it: meditation, contemplation, prayer, mindfulness, the various forms of yoga and tai chi and martial arts. These practices are not arbitrary impositions on the natural mind. They are responses to the natural mind's tendency to wander, techniques for cultivating the attention that is essential to perceiving the pattern. I am not going to prescribe any particular practice. Different people resonate with different approaches, and the practice that works for one person may not work for another. What I will say is that some practice is essential. You cannot perceive the pattern consistently without training the attention. The muscle of awareness must be strengthened like any other muscle, and the strengthening requires repeated exercise, regular discipline, ongoing commitment. Find a practice that works for you: meditation, yoga, contemplation, walking in nature, whatever brings you into a state of heightened presence, and do it regularly. Make it non-negotiable. Treat it as the foundation upon which everything else in your life is built. The second orientation I want to offer is surrender. This word has negative connotations in our culture, which values control and autonomy and self-determination above almost everything else. But surrender, properly understood, is not weakness or passivity or giving up. Surrender is the recognition that you are not in control, that you have never been in control, that the illusion of control was just another part of the dream from which you are now awakening. Surrender is aligning yourself with the flow rather than struggling against it. Surrender is allowing the pattern to work through you rather than trying to impose your will on the pattern. This does not mean doing nothing. This does not mean abdicating responsibility for your choices and actions. Paradoxically, surrender leads to more effective action, not less, because action that comes from alignment is supported by the pattern in a way that ego-driven action is not. When you surrender, you stop wasting energy on resistance. You stop fighting battles that cannot be won. You stop trying to force outcomes that the pattern does not support. And the energy that you were spending on all of that fruitless effort becomes available for something else, for creative response, for adaptive action, for participation in the flow rather than opposition to it. Surrender requires trust. This is perhaps the hardest part. To surrender means to trust that the pattern is benevolent, that it wants your flourishing, that following it will lead to places that are good for you, even if you cannot see them from where you are now. This trust cannot be manufactured. It must be earned, over time, through repeated experience of the pattern's reliability, its intelligence, its capacity to guide you through difficulties to outcomes you could not have anticipated. In the beginning, the trust may be fragile, easily shaken by setbacks and disappointments. But with practice, with perseverance, the trust deepens. The pattern proves itself, and surrender becomes not a leap of faith, but a settled disposition, a default mode, a way of being that is maintained even when circumstances are challenging. The third orientation is community. I mentioned earlier the community of the awakened, the network of those who have perceived the pattern and are working in their various ways to serve it. This community is real, and connection with it is essential. You cannot walk this path alone. The forces that would pull you back into the sleep of consensus reality are too strong. The doubts and fears and discouragements are too persistent. You need others who understand, who can reflect back to you the truth of what you have seen, who can offer support when you are struggling, and correction when you are veering off course. Finding this community may not be easy, depending on where you live and what resources are available to you. The community of the awakened is not organized, does not advertise, does not have membership lists or regular meetings. It is a network of relationships, a web of connection that forms organically among those who are tracking the same realities. You find it by putting yourself out there, by speaking your truth, by making yourself available to encounter. You find it in unlikely places, in conversations that suddenly go deeper than expected, in chance meetings that turn out to be anything but chance, in the synchronicities that begin to multiply once you have committed to the path. And when you find it, you will recognize it. You will know, immediately and unmistakably, that you are in the presence of others who see what you see, who understand what you understand, who are walking the same path, even if their specific trajectory is different from yours. This recognition is one of the great joys of the awakened life, the end of isolation, the end of carrying the burden alone, the beginning of collaboration in the service of something larger than any individual. The fourth orientation is creativity. The pattern is creative, ceaselessly, inexhaustibly creative, always generating new forms, new combinations, new expressions of the infinite potential that underlies all things. And those who perceive the pattern and align themselves with it become channels for this creativity. Something flows through them: ideas, images, insights, inventions, that does not come from the personal unconscious, that is not merely rearrangement of materials already present in the individual mind, but that seems to come from somewhere else, from the depths of the pattern itself. I do not mean that everyone who perceives the pattern becomes an artist or a writer or a musician, though many do. Creativity takes many forms, and some of them are not recognized as creative by conventional standards. The way you raise your children, the way you build your relationships, the way you solve problems in your work, the way you organize your community, all of these can be expressions of creativity, channels through which the pattern's creative intelligence flows into the world. What matters is not the form, but the source, not the particular expression, but the quality of connection to the ground from which all expression springs. To cultivate creativity, you must learn to get out of the way. The ego is the enemy of creativity because the ego wants to control, wants to take credit, wants to shape the outcome according to its preconceptions. True creativity requires a kind of listening, a receptivity, a willingness to be surprised by what emerges. You do not create in the sense of making something from nothing. You co-create in the sense of participating in a process that is larger than yourself, that uses you but does not belong to you, that produces results that often astonish you as much as anyone else. The fifth and final orientation I want to offer is hope. This may seem like a strange note to end on, given everything I have said about danger and difficulty and challenge. But hope, properly understood, is not optimism. Optimism is the belief that everything will turn out well. Hope is something different. Hope is the commitment to act as if a good outcome is possible, even when you cannot be certain that it is, even when the evidence is ambiguous, even when the forces arrayed against the good seem overwhelming. We are in a moment when hope is essential. The challenges facing humanity are real and serious. The outcome of the transition we are in is genuinely uncertain. It is possible to look at the situation and despair, to conclude that the forces of destruction are too strong, that the awakening will not happen in time, that we are doomed to collapse and extinction. And I will not lie to you, this is a possible outcome. The pattern does not guarantee success. The pattern provides opportunity, but the opportunity can be missed, the moment can be lost, the transition can go badly. But despair is a self-fulfilling prophecy. To give up hope is to withdraw your energy from the struggle, to abandon the field to those who have not given up, to make the negative outcome more likely by your very belief in its inevitability. Hope, by contrast, is a form of participation. To hope is to act, to engage, to contribute your energy to the outcome you want to see. Hope is not a prediction about the future. Hope is a posture toward the future, a way of relating to uncertainty that keeps you in the game, that keeps you contributing, that keeps you available to the pattern as an agent of its purposes. And here is the deepest truth about hope. It is not based on calculation. It is not based on weighing the evidence and concluding that success is more likely than failure. It is based on something else entirely, on the recognition that your participation matters regardless of the outcome, that the meaning of your life is not determined by whether you win or lose, but by how you play, by whether you align yourself with the light or with the darkness, by whether you contribute to the awakening or to the sleep. The pattern asks you to serve it not because service will lead to success, but because service is right, because alignment with the pattern is the fulfillment of your deepest nature, because there is no other way to live that does not involve a betrayal of what you have seen and what you know. So serve. Whether the transition succeeds or fails, whether humanity awakens or perishes, whether the eschaton arrives in your lifetime or is deferred to future generations, serve the pattern. Do what you are called to do. Become what you are meant to become. Offer your gifts, however modest, to the great work that is underway. And trust. Trust that the pattern knows what it is doing. Trust that your contribution matters, even if you cannot see how. Trust that the whole vast mysterious enterprise of cosmic evolution has room in it for you, for your choices, for your life. This is what it means to become aware of the pattern. This is what it means to cross the threshold from the sleep of ordinary life into the awakened state of conscious participation. It is not an ending. It is a beginning, the beginning of a new phase of your existence, a phase in which everything you do is informed by the knowledge of what you are and what reality is and what is at stake in this particular moment of history. You have been given something precious, the ability to see. Now the question is, what will you do with that sight? The pattern is real. You have perceived it. And from this moment forward, nothing will ever be quite the same. The threshold has been crossed. There is no turning back. And the adventure, the great adventure of awakening, of transformation, of participation in the mystery, has only begun.